Hello and welcome to this video on infrared photography. My name is Barry Beckham and this video has been recorded at HD resolution. I've called this presentation 3 years on because it's a little over 3 years in fact since I first had a Canon 5D Mark II camera converted to shoot infrared. I suppose the question many people may be asking is, after 3.5 years, was the conversion of the camera a 5-minute wonder or not? I would say definitely not a 5-minute wonder, and the camera is still in use. Now I think it's pretty obvious to say that shooting infrared images will have a limited following. But then again, many photographers do seem to find that infrared images have a universal impact and appeal, and it is a great way to produce some really stunning monochrome images. To have a go at this fascinating part of digital photography, you will require a spare camera and some expense to get it converted, but it's well worth taking the plunge. Back in the days of film, anyone could try black and white infrared, but it wasn't that easy. The film was expensive and at times hard to track down. It was also quite difficult to handle and develop, and of course not many people had darkrooms or the ability to black out a room to try infrared film. Having dabbled with infrared photography back in my film days, I did want to get back into it with a digital camera. But it wasn't until May 2014 that I decided to have a Canon 5D camera converted for infrared. I chose a company called Camera Clinic based in Melbourne to do the conversion. But you'll not have too much difficulty finding a company to do this for you wherever you are in the world. Now this isn't the most dramatic of infrared images, but it was the first image I shot with the camera on the 10th of May 2014. 100 ISO, 125th of a second at f8, easily handheld. So although this particular image isn't that inspiring, I was inspired and pretty pleased with the results I was getting straight away with my newly converted camera. Infrared is invisible light, of course, and the camera conversion is where the infrared blocking filter that's found in front of the sensor in all cameras is removed. The infrared filter is replaced with a visible light blocking filter. So the infrared images we first shoot with our camera may have a very strong magenta color cast. Now that's not a problem because it's easily removed either via a manual white balance setting on our camera or via Adobe Camera Raw or Lightroom. So this is the sort of image I got from my camera before I set up the custom white balance and before any manipulation. But as I said, don't worry about this strong magenta cast. It's easy to remove and it doesn't affect the quality. There are different strengths of visible light blocking filters that you can have placed into your camera once the infrared filter has been removed. So you may need to talk to those who are doing the conversion for you to make up your mind what to choose. I had a 780 nanometer filter added to my Canon 5D to block most of the visible light because I was after good contrast black and white images. Some have a slightly less powerful blocking filter, and as a result that will allow some visible light into the sensor as well, and of course that will include some color. This image was supplied to me by a friend in the UK, and you can see here that the strength of the filter must be considerably less than mine because it's allowed quite a bit of color to record into the picture. Personally, I find this artificial color in infrared images a little bit on the transient side, a bit like a filter effect in Photoshop. It seems to be okay for half a dozen uses, but then the appeal of the colour is lost or reduced. Great monochrome images don't seem to lose that appeal at all, and colour can always be added later if required. When it comes to shooting infrared, we do need to shoot raw images. We need those raw images to give us the latitude and flexibility to create the contrast and clarity that we're looking for. I use Adobe Camera Raw and Photoshop to do my editing, but the tools and sliders we need are exactly the same as in Lightroom's Develop module. Producing sparkling monochrome infrared images is remarkably easy because infrared handles high contrast so well, far better than conventional visible light photography in the same conditions. What I've found in the past 3 years is that the exposure is remarkably stable and predictable in the majority of cases. I would say that using 200 ISO, most of my images will have been taken within a 3-stop range of 250th at f8, 125th at f8, or maybe a 60th at f8. I use my camera set to manual exposure all of the time because we cannot use the light meter in the way we would with conventional photography. Sometimes I bracketed exposures around the 125th of a second at f8 because if I choose a bracket of 3, I'm going to get the range I mentioned a few moments ago, 250th at f8, 125 at f8 and 60th at f8. And with one of those I'm bound to have a really good exposure to take through Photoshop. But because infrared is so kind to contrast, I found in practice almost any one of those shots could actually be used. While shooting infrared images over the past 3.5 years, I have found it to be one of the most stimulating and interesting projects I've had for some considerable time. I've not found infrared a 5-minute wonder, and it continues to form a fair part of my photographic interest. Here we have an infrared panorama shot. I shot the images in portrait mode and handheld and just swiveled my body to capture a series of shots and created the monochrome version. Once I created this version, I used Adobe Camera Raw and the duotone option to add a little bit of color. But then while in full Creative Flow, I also included a blue tone version as well. Now when I create 3 images like this, at the time I'm never absolutely sure which image I'm going to like best. So what I tend to do is to just live with them for some time, and these have been in my finished folder now for about 7 months, 8 months, and when I look through them now, I find that the one that appeals to me most seems to find a way of showing itself to me, and whilst I like the original black and white, I must admit the one with the duotone created in Adobe Camera Raw is the one I think if I was going to have a print done or put something on the wall, then this one would be it. Now when we shoot infrared, there is that traditional look which we come to recognize fairly easily. The way the infrared light makes leaves and foliage very bright within the frame, and where it has that ability to sometimes turn blue skies almost jet black. But of course it doesn't always have to be quite so dramatic or obvious as an infrared shot. It's great to be able to get out the infrared camera in the middle of the day in bright sunshine and still be able to capture great shots. But that doesn't mean we need to confine it to just those times. If we get the infrared camera out at dawn and dusk, you'll be surprised the results you will get. We do tend to get used to that traditional infrared look, and I think we can see that with the big tree on the right hand side here. But there are others where perhaps we may not even first notice, if we notice at all, that it's an infrared image. So the visible light filter that replaces the infrared filter in my camera was quite a strong one at 780 nanometers. That means I don't get any colour in the images themselves, so I'm left to add the colour later. And of course we have the obvious, we've already looked at blue tone and duotone, but of course we have sepia too. And here you can see another image with an all over blue tone, just a delicate one, but if you look carefully at the old corrugated tin roof of the old house, you'll notice that that has had a slightly different treatment, and we've got a slightly warmer tone there, which just lifts it a little bit in my view. Here the strategic colour is a little bit more obvious, and we're drawn instantly to the flat calm water of course, but we've also got a little bit of colour up in the sky, and once again some warm tones in the bark of the tree on the left hand side. So we do have the opportunity within Adobe Camera Raw to add colour via duotones, and this is another example of that. But of course when we take the images into Photoshop, we can then bring into play layers and layer masks, and we can strategically colour any part or all of the image if we want to take the time to do it. Here we have another infrared image, not taken in what we would consider to be perfect infrared light. From what I can recall, it was quite overcast at the time, and we can probably tell that by not seeing any harsh shadows. But as you can see, I've used layers and layer masks here to strategically colour various parts of the image. So I think, like many other aspects of photography, shooting infrared images can be quite wide and quite varied. Yes, I suppose we can stay with just that traditional infrared look, but if this image does anything at all, it does indicate that that doesn't have to be the case. If you want to get the best from your own infrared images, come along to my website and you will find tutorials that'll take you through the image editing process. If you want to learn Photoshop, then come to my website and look up Photoshop for Photographers.